are now listening to the Come to the Table podcast with your host, Sean McCoy, where each week he invites a guest and welcomes them to the table to discuss any and all topics. First and foremost, Christians are called to love all people, and one of the best ways to love them is to sit down, talk with them, and listen to what they have to say. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Come to the Table podcast. This is your host, Sean McCoy. I'm really excited, as I always am, to reach out to you guys and bring you somebody that I've come across in my life who I have invited to the table to speak about an issue. And I met Jim Burgoon as some of these are conventional, some are unconventional. I met Jim through a group on Facebook, the same place I met Joey Martinez, if you caught that episode. He's a veteran. He's part of this veteranpreneur group called The Tribe. And through just one of those interesting, I would say, God-led kind of relationships as we developed it and got to know in that sense. Some of these things came up. And one area that I thought Jim really excelled at was just a humility and a practicality and just an openness and a willingness to serve others that I saw in him, an honest effort to do that, and was kind of intrigued. And so I got to talk to him a little bit more. And so it came up around the idea, part of his story came up around him and his wife and how they've dealt with her mental illness and the suffering around that. And so that around the topic of today, which Jim has been very gracious to be able to be a part of and be willing to talk about, is around mental health, around mental suffering, and what do you do, all those different things. And so Jim, I appreciate your time, buddy. Welcome to the table.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to share with you the journey, because it is really a journey. We all focus on the destination, but the truth of the matter is if you are a believer, you will get to be with Jesus at one point, but we have to enjoy the journey no matter what crisis comes at. So I'm just happy to be able to chat with you about it and your listeners and, help wherever we can.
Appreciate that, brother. So as we always do, and this is another homage, and I get to say this every time, and I'm excited because one of my favorite podcasts, and one of the things I love about podcasts as well, is just the nature of the information, the willingness to share. There's no restrictions. There's no even real objections or objectives. Like, we're not trying to make a dollar. We're not trying to do the rest of that stuff. We're just trying to get in contact with people. And I love that about the podcast community. And so in that regard, I'm paying a little bit of an homage to one of my favorite podcasts, The Team Never Quit, which is part of Marcus Luttrell and David Rutherford, former Navy SEALs. I was in the Navy, and so there's a connection there. But I love their podcast because they inspire people never to quit and use people's stories. But what they do, Jim, is they get people going. They get people kind of get the brain going by asking some questions. And so I have 3 questions in front of me, but I'm going to ask you to choose a number 1, 2, or 3. And then whatever question it is, I'm going to ask you. But I can't tell you what it is.
All right. That's okay. I like games. Let's go with door number 3.
Door number 3. If you could make one rule that everyone had to follow in the world, what rule would you make?
Walk in forgiveness.
Walk in forgiveness. Well, I know that's
yes, sir.
You love it. Love the answer. All right, so the next 2 are kind of a standard. One is, how would you describe your personal spiritual faith belief process system? What are you, kind of thing?
What am I? That's a great question, and it's not about what I am, but who I belong to. And I am a follower of Jesus Christ. Gave my life many years ago. And it's interesting enough, I was saved out of witchcraft and atheism. So I am a believer in Jesus, and I follow him with all of my heart.
So to get a little context, it's one of the things that I wasn't aware of until we started talking, obviously, that do you want to give a little background on that in terms of your faith journey and where you've been in some of those roads?
Oh, absolutely. Well, when I was a kid, I believed that I had an experience, and I really believed that I was going to be in ministry. I had no idea that anything beyond Catholic Church existed. So when I had this inkling feeling in my heart, I was like, man, I'm going to serve Jesus. I'm going to be in ministry. I thought I was going to be a Catholic priest. And as life went on, I lived a hard life. And about age 10, after a bunch of series of unfortunate events, if you want to say it that way, around age 10, I watched my grandfather choke to death. And it was at that point I had decided that I was going to become an atheist. I said God was dead to me. And so a year later, my sister gets a brain tumor, and just these continual troubles happen. Somewhere around 13 or 14 years old, I fell into a group of people because, again, I lived in a rough area. I didn't have a lot of friends, and the group of people that I met were witches. They practiced witchcraft, and so they were the people that accepted me, so I joined them. So it's really funny because I was, at the time, an atheist who was practicing witchcraft, and over the years, I started picking up a lot of Buddhist belief systems and some Hindu, and I melded it all together into this anti-God belief where I can practice magic and live my life any way I want. Well, let me take a long story, make it short.
Sure.
When I met my wife was not a believer, but she had been raised in a Baptist school. And so she actually year and a half into our relationship got saved. I'm trying to teach her witchcraft, and she met Jesus. And it was a tough 2 years because 2 years later, I became a Christian at age 26, or age 24, matter of fact. It was 26. I had to think about that for a second. And so she had really stood her ground for Jesus. And she said, we were living together. We were doing all the things that married people should do, but we weren't married. And she said, I'm not going to do this anymore because this is not my faith. And she was crying. And my wife had a mental illness back then too, but we didn't know about it. Like she wasn't diagnosed when we first met. And so she goes, this is not my faith. This is not what I'm doing. It rocked my world. It literally, I remember I'm an atheist, witchcraft, all this stuff. It rocked my world. So I spent 2 years trying to figure out who this Jesus was that caused my wife to flip on her everything. And 2 years later, I gave my life to Jesus. And it was so funny because I come out of atheism and witchcraft, give my life fully to Jesus. And then between the next 6 months, I got married as a Christian because my wife refused to marry me because I didn't share the faith. And I was in Bible college. So that was fun in itself, just sitting in Bible college with all of these people who have been Christians their whole life. And I'm sitting there I had no idea what anything was. And then I wound up becoming an ordained pastor and been in ministry for 15 years now.
So quite a journey, to say the least, right? And,
yeah.
And so usually our last question is about an impression of a faith other than your own and what you've experienced with them. But I want to touch on something, and just for the listener's sake. So before this conversation, Jim and I had never met. We'd never actually had a conversation. So we're kind of flying into this blind a little bit on our history, and we're letting this conversation happen literally as you're listening to it. So I want to ask around your opinion now in terms of somebody who's there's people out there that practice witchcraft and that are more than happy to be atheist and agnostic and stuff like that. Part of our sentiment is opening the table to anyone to come in and talk regardless of those things. In your experience with them and having been on that other side, literally, I mean, what is your takeaway now in terms of when somebody says, hey, I'm an atheist, or I am agnostic, or even I practice, Santeria or whatever it happens to be? How do you typically respond to that? Or what is your impression of those people? If I can say,
oh no, that's fine. And my impression of those guys is, man, I love people where they're at because I was there. I don't judge them for what they believe. I don't judge them for what they practice, because I was there. I was on the other side. I believed what I felt was right. I believed it so much that I would argue that it was right, until Jesus opened my eyes to the truth and what really truth is. So I approach these guys with a heart of understanding. My first questions are usually, man, tell me why you believe what you believe. I'm not sitting there trying to say, well, here's the truth and debate. Could I do that? Yeah, but why would I want to? Because my job is not to help people get the truth. My job is to help them to meet Jesus, and Jesus will give them the truth. And so I just have conversations because I care about people. So impression-wise, man, everybody starts somewhere, and nobody's born a Christian. So you got to love people where they are and let people have the choice. And at the end of the day, if they say, you know what, I don't want to follow Jesus, I respect them. I respect their belief. I can respect people and disagree with them at the same time and still be friends with them. And that's okay because I'm not the judge. I'm not the jury. So that's where I come from. But I always love to have great conversations with the mutual understanding that I still learn from them. All the atheists that I know, and when I was an atheist, and even the ones I'm still friends with, are brilliant people. And so you always want to recognize where people are and understand that they're there for a reason, and they believe what they believe because it melds with what they went through in life. It melds with what they may feel. Now, as a Christian, we don't believe anything else is the truth other than Christianity. Right. But we have to recognize and respect people and love people where they are, and then help them walk the journey. And if they choose to come with us, great. If they don't choose to come with us, that's between them and Jesus when we get into the afterlife. That's not for me to judge them.
And that really becomes the crux of a lot of the issues that we see now, because it's so hard, it seems, to have those conversations or to even allow for that difference. Because when something's different, right, and witchcraft and atheism is pretty different than a Christian faith, right, in terms of...
Absolutely.
So let's, just to play, no pun intended, devil's advocate in a sense, there are many of our Christian brothers and sisters who would argue with you and I and say, well, no, we're supposed to go and save them. We're supposed to help them. We're supposed to bring them into the faith and get them away from that. And that's what we need to do because we have to save them. I mean, there's always that little part in the back of your head, the evangelical part of it that says, I got to go out and do that. And so how do you reconcile that from your personal faith standpoint? And again, this is a bit of how this podcast works. Jim, we're not asking Jim to speak for all Christians in a sense, but in a sense, every time Jim does something as a Christian, he does, and so do I. So I'm not asking you to make a blanket statement, but I kind of am. And how would you approach that in terms of a fellow Christian saying, hey, Jim, and have you had that? Have you had people go, hey, man, that's not the way. We got to get in there. We got to save him, and nothing else matters.
Yeah, and there, you know what, and I have had that. I've had people be very, no, this is what we do. We need to save them. We need to save them. My response to them and to any of Christian brother and sister is basically a question. Jesus was master at asking questions. And I asked them, did you die on the cross? Because if I have to save them, then I should have been the one on the cross. And because I wasn't on the cross, I don't have the power to save anyone. I only have the power to introduce them to the one that can. And so when I get met with these guys, I'm like, did you die on the cross? And most people, no. Then how are you the one to be saved them? Now, I do agree that we do need to be out there. We do need to be sharing our faith and stuff like that. And I do that regularly. But the deal is that I didn't die on the cross. I don't save anyone. And if I can go over to one other thing, we'll just use a biblical example. A guy comes up to Jesus, rich man, and you're probably familiar with the story. He says, hey, I've done all this stuff. I followed these rules. What else must I do to be saved? And Jesus basically said, well, give everything you have to the poor and then come follow me and you're good. And the guy looked at him. He got, whatever feelings. He's like, oh man, I don't know if I could do that, and walked off. Did Jesus berate him? Did Jesus force him? No, he let him go. And he said to his disciples, it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven.
Right.
And when we understand how Jesus operated, Jesus didn't beat people over the head. He was here for a purpose, and he gave people a choice. And he went to the cross, not me. And that's how I deal with that.
So I think this is a good segue into, not only how you deal with it, that's obviously an external thing, but internally, in terms of our own lives and how we practice our faith within the context of how we live. As I mentioned before, the reason we're having Jim on is to talk about an area this I think becoming more and more prominent around mental health and mental illness and suffering and all of those things and what it is and what it isn't. And so with that, I'd love to have a conversation around you as you're willing. And Jim, we talked about this before, to be as open or to be as whatever as he would like to talk about his story and what him and his wife have been through, and then some of the internal things, but also how that relates to how you've interacted with others, how they've interacted with you. And so can you tell me a little bit about just your story around your wife and all this stuff that you've been dealing with?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll start somewhere around the beginning, and then you can ask as you see fit some questions, those things. When we first met, to this day, I love my wife more than I've ever loved her. And every day I grow in love with her. And I want to make that clear, because if you're somebody who is dealing with a mental illness, it is so easy to walk away. And I don't say that lightly. You know, to the Christian, they'll hear, they get the mindset, well, man, you can never walk away. And, you know, this stoic mindset. And to people who are not Christians, they're like, man, you should walk away. But the deal is that it's got to be an internal choice. And my wife and I have been together 18 years, and I choose every day because I honor with what Jesus tells me, you know, in the Bible, that, you know, marriage is for life. And I said sickness and health. It's a covenant I made with her. And I learned to fall in love with her more and more every day, even though sometimes because of the illness, it's very easy to get upset, bitter, and walk away. When we first met, you know, one of the things is with my wife's illness, let me just say this, is my wife is diagnosed with both bipolarism and borderline personality disorder. You know, we sat with a therapist and they said that any one of those two are very intense and very challenging in themselves. Having them both together is almost sometimes an impossible task ahead of us.
So real quick, if you wouldn't mind, and I know you're not an MD or a PhD, but could you put some context into what those actually mean? We hear that a lot. We hear, you know, schizophrenia or you know, sociopath.
Oh yeah.
Can you kind of give us a little bit of a brief 101 definition of what that actually means?
Okay, so yes, so there's, you know, my wife has, you know, let's start with bipolarism. Now, I know it's culturally relevant for everybody. It's like, man, I'm bipolar. Right. You know, I was having a conversation with my sister last night. She says, I think I'm bipolar. Right. I said, no, you're not bipolar. Just because you have mood swings does not make you bipolar. Okay. The mood swings of a bipolar, now that bipolarism is a mood disorder. And sometimes, you know, there's actually 4 levels of bipolarism. 1, 2, and then there's 2 others that I forget the names offhand. And they mark with the amount of time you spend in your mood swing. And the mood swing goes from depressed to manic. Manic being extremely excited, extremely hyper, can't sit down, boom, 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 always doing something. And depressed, obviously, we understand depression. Now, to really be, you know, somebody who has, you know, bipolarism, like my wife spent the last 4 months on the couch because she couldn't get out of her depression. She was able to bathe, she was able to go to the doctor and eat, but she spent most days on the couch all day and then would make it back to the bed and spend the rest of the night in the bed. That was what we deal with. And then in the last couple of months, there's times where she gets manic, and when she's manic, she cleans, she cooks, and it's like, whoa, you know, it's night and day. It is a seriously night and day. And then within bipolarism, there's also impulsivity and manipulativeness and all this stuff that goes back and forth, and a lot of sometimes anger, and sometimes you know, when they're talking with you, it becomes very aggressive. And that's usually on the manic side. Also marked by serious bouts of suicidal tendencies, because all they want to do is end their suffering. That's the mood disorder side of it. And it's more than just that, but that's just the basic understanding. And my wife.
So can I want to, because something came up, something that you said, I want to ask you a little bit about. And again, I know you're not a PhD, but obviously you've experienced this and done some research and have talked to a few people. So it seems to me that there's a time element to it, right? So if let's because a normal person could have that. Like I was thinking about, I get frustrated at my kids, and and in the midst of that, like for the next few minutes, I might immediately start cleaning up the kitchen and just kind of organize whatever's right there in my frustration, and then 5 minutes later it's kind of subsided. So it sounds like, so is it easy to maybe extrapolate that out into imagining that, but it just doesn't go away, that need to kind of react that way? Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. Because remember, you're frustrated, so you clean and then you go do whatever. That's the natural progression of human emotion. Because some people, depends on your personality and your personality typing, some people will do that. They get real frustrated, they yell at their kids, and they'll go clean something because there's a progression in that makes them feel better because they see an immediate result. And then, that's just the natural progression of human emotion. With bipolarism, you're trapped in that emotion and the intensity of it, okay? So if my wife, I'm the disciplinarian, and simply because my wife can't control those emotions. Like if she begins to yell, she can't stop. It's not like she can go, okay, I'm done with you, go away, and then go clean. She gets trapped in that emotion. And that's one of the intensities and the markers of it. She can't break free of it until it runs its course. And it could take days or even weeks, depending on the intensity of your bipolarism, to get rid of that. Some people have what's called rapid cycling mood swings, which means 1 minute they're depressed, 10 minutes later they're super happy and then 5 minutes later they're depressed, and they can stay that way for weeks. Some people, bipolarism 1 is marked with more long-term, which means, so bipolarism 2 is this rapid cycling thing. Bipolarism 1, and this is my understanding, again, I'm not a PhD, so your listeners who may have more information can know a lot better. But I do know, like with bipolar 1 is you stay in, like, say you're depressed. Well, you're depressed for like a month, 2 months. If you're manic, you may stay in that for 2 weeks. You have a longer periods of those times. So yeah, human emotion will run its course. Bipolar mood disorders, you can't choose. You have to let it go. You have to follow it. You try to do your coping just to calm down and get it to trigger your body to go back. But once you're in, you're in.
Right, and then you said borderline personality disorder was the other one, right?
Yes.
Which is different.
Mm-hmm. Very different, because where the personality disorder deals in, just like its name, personality issues, bipolar is mood swings. Now, again, there's a spectrum for personality disorder, and on the personality disorder, and one of the biggest questions I get when we tell people that she has borderline does she have multiple personalities? No, she does not. Okay. And because that's the first thing, because that's been popularized, multiple personalities, always in movies and stuff like that. But that's not borderline, because personality is also called, or the multiple personality is also called dissociation disorder, personality disorder. And so on the spectrum of this, so on the same spectrum as narcissism, multiple personality, borderline, all that stuff. Borderline is marked with issues of image, insecurities, manipulative body type. It deals with basically, let me say this. Somebody who has a personality disorder, or who has borderline, let me just stick with borderline, will be anything that you need them to be, because they deal with such severe image issues, rejection issues, and those things, that they will do whatever they can so that they can escape the feelings of what those emotions bring. There's deep angers, deep manipulations, deep impulsivities, because it's like Swiss cheese. All the holes in the Swiss cheese?
Right.
Your personality is Swiss cheese, and you have no sense of who you are. You have no sense of what you want, because you're this hurricane on the inside of you. And hurricane is probably the best term I can give you, of just this pain and magic pill thinking, which is terminology I use for, one thing fixes everything kind of thinking, pie in the sky, magic, like as long as I get this, I'll be okay kind of thinking. They deal with the intensity of that. So you have these two conditions, and you put them together, and it just creates one heck of a challenge.
No, I'm just trying to process that in that sense. So obviously there's not one magic pill. It's not something
right.
that and there's not really a fix. It's, in terms of like, just do this and then it goes away per se. This is
right.
ongoing and that kind of thing. So, okay. So in that context, obviously it sounds like you didn't start out at the point you are now. You struggled in the beginning, I'm sure,
right.
to understand this. And then can you kind of play into that a little bit, and how did your faith play into this? Did you start to feel like, did you go back and forth on that? How did people respond in that sense?
Yeah.
And then to put it in their perspective, this is your wife's going through this, and you're right there next to her in this whole thing, and maybe define a little bit of what it's like to be on the outside, in a sense, in taking all this in, as somebody who's part of that support system.
Right, absolutely. And let me jump on this on the end. My wife may have the condition, but we walk together, so we're going through it.
Well, I like that you said that, and I do want to put that in there. That I've seen that a lot with. I think that's really important, and I think that obviously you have that, that you have that aspect of it, and how you're dealing with that, but that it affects everybody, and that's in your own close knit system. But even as a community, even as people, that
Absolutely.
It may not be in my house, but somebody's house is having this, and if for no other reason than to understand that there's other people going through this, and maybe how we interact in that regard. Because I'm sure that has a significant impact on how you deal with this on a day to day. And now you walk outside, and here comes the rain. It's a different storm. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And plus, we have children. We have 2 children too, so that's another dynamic to that.
Sure.
Where to begin with a lot of that. One of the things with mental illness is it progressively gets more challenging as they get older if it's not been dealt with. As I mentioned, when we first met, I had no idea she had it. I didn't. Matter of fact, one of the markers of borderline is they're very good at hiding and their true feelings and their true emotions behind this wall of they want you to see an image of someone, So when we first met, I thought she had no problems. I was like, man. We got married and everything started to fall apart, because there was no place for her to hide anymore. And I mean, it was bad in the beginning, suicidal, threats, and we were fighting and all that. But I had grown up in a rough neighborhood, in a rough town. I'm from Philadelphia. I didn't know any better. Okay. So, and I'm leading into somewhere with this for your listeners, because this is going to be super important. So my upbringing, that's how they fought. That's how we fought in my house. People would yell at each other and all things would happen and everybody would say something stupid, and then you just move on with life. So for the first couple of years, I was like, yeah, whatever. My wife actually got diagnosed because we were angry. This is like 6 years into our relationship. We were angry at each other, and I said, I'm done fighting. I'm just not going to talk. I was mad for 2 days. Well, my wife couldn't handle that. My wife tried to cut her wrists while she was making a salad. She put the knife down, called the cops, and said, come get me because I'm going to kill myself. And she committed herself. And she actually got diagnosed because of that. Now, I say all that to say this. If you're in a relationship and somebody, I don't care if they're playing, if this is just their go-to, if they ever say, I'm going to kill myself, you let them know, then we need to go to the doctors, because I blew it off as, nothing. I blew it off as like, oh, this is just more of the stuff I grew up with. My mom did this, and I was just tired of this. I had no idea there was something dangerous underneath of that, because my wife is currently in the hospital at the moment for trying to kill herself, or having at least the strong urges. She couldn't fight anymore. She'll be let out this Thursday. So the first thing is take every threat like that serious, because it's a cry for help. And so she was diagnosed, and I'll be honest with you, that changed everything. Because before the diagnosis, it was just 2 people fighting, and you just get bitter, you get angry. You're like, man, God, why did you do this to me? You get all these crazy thoughts. Then when she got diagnosed, it was like the light bulb went off. It was like, oh my gosh, she actually is really sick. And at that moment, I was able to let go of the bitterness, the anger. And then I said, you know what, God, I'm so sorry for blaming you, because this wasn't you. I chose to marry this woman, and that's okay. And now I understand what I'm getting into, and she's not well, and I need to take care of her. I need to be the husband she needs me to be. Now, I don't want your listeners or you to think I'm a saint. By no means. I still get angry and I still pop off, because it's a massive amount of emotion to deal with. So it's not like this, I glow in the dark when the lights are off kind of thing. Okay.
So to that for your own personal journey, so that was your first real kind of epiphany moment. You would say that, hey, there's something else going on here, and it's not just 2 people not getting along because they're married. There's something else at play.
Yes.
So for you to internalize that, I mean, did you and you're being very humble about the fact that you chose to do that, but there might be some who would argue that, well, either it was a misrepresentation or you didn't get the full picture going into it, or, if anything, kind of gives you an out. I mean, if that
right.
is that, did you have those thoughts, and then how did you get around that? Was it just you kind of come back to center, or how did you? You know what I mean? Because you could make an argument. You could say, well, Jim, that's nice, but you really didn't know, so that's not really your fault. You can get out, no problem.
Yeah, I've dealt with that. I've dealt with the fact is at times I'm like, man, if I had only known, you get frustrated. But I realize two things. Number one, I get frustrated like that when the emotion is so intense and I just can't handle it at the moment. And in the beginning, when I was still young in the faith and young in my marriage, I was like, if I had only known, right? Struggled that intensely at times. But then I realized my wife didn't get to choose this life. She, and this is how my internal thing, and I did a lot of praying that time, and God was so gracious to me and helping me see things that I wouldn't normally see. And I started coming to these conclusions where my wife didn't get to choose this. I got to choose this. Could you argue with the misrepresentation? Yeah. But you know what? I could also argue that, well, you should have taken longer and started asking questions, kind of thing. Do you really know the person you're getting together with? Do you really know them? And most people don't. And then I realized in my life, and this is, obviously this is a Christian belief about covenant and stuff, but I realized my dad was an absolute jerk, man. He still is. I haven't seen him in 30 some years, but I heard recently he's been in and out of hospital or the jail. He's like 60 some years old and was arrested like a few months ago. I haven't talked to him in 34, 35 years. But here's the deal. I had a choice to make. I had every right to walk out of this relationship. She's ill. I believe that it wasn't going to work because she was so ill. And I started thinking, I was like, man, my dad walked out on me when I was 4. Do I want to do this to this woman? She didn't get to choose this life. She was born with a lot of it. Her mother was doing cocaine when she was pregnant with her. Her family has a really big history of mental illness. And then my wife was abused growing up, sexually molested and all sorts of stuff. I said, she didn't get to choose this. Am I just going to be another person that walks out on her? Or am I going to die for her like Christ says I should die for the church and just, do whatever it needs to do to make this work out? And then I remembered when I said I do, I made a covenant for better or for worse, for sickness and health, till death do us part. And 18 years later, has it gotten easier? I wouldn't say easier, but I would say I've gotten better at understanding the signs, understanding what to do about the signs, understanding what I need to do in the midst of the signs that I see and when to hospitalize her. I've gotten better at that. Doesn't make it easier, but the deal is that I had a covenant and I said, you know what? That commitment I made was so strong. It's what got us through 18 years. Because I'm not about to give up on her because everybody else in her life has. And I want to say this before we digress into something else is my wife's illness does not define her. That's not who she is. That's what she deals with. My wife can sing. My wife is beautiful. When you sit with my wife, especially you ladies, if you ever sat and talked with my wife, my gosh, there was a running joke. Within 5 minutes of talking with her, you would tell her your life story. You would start crying together, and she would pray for you. She has one of the most beautiful, giving hearts that I have ever met in a single person. I mean, it is incredible, the grace gift that she has on her life. And so the deal is that this illness does not define us. It does not define her. What defines us is the choices we make and understanding that when the illness is active, we make the decisions to keep her safe and keep our family safe. But that illness is not her. That's not who she is. It's what she deals with. And there's a big difference in how you define people in a relationship that really how you're going to look at it and the decisions you make in it.
So you said something that really resonated with me, and that was that it doesn't get easier, right? There's this desire we have around things like what we deserve and around, just this well, if I just do this, things will get better, or why. So that's a unique perspective, I would say. Unfortunately, so,
Mm-hmm.
but because we hope, well, if I do this, it'll get better. How did you come to that in terms of like that suffering? It's not going to get any easier, and but that's okay. There seems to be a little bit of you kind of acquiesce that. You kind of say, okay, but you're not like mad at it. Whereas there's that tendency in us to say, hey, I've done my time. I know I've done it on lots of things. I've paid my dues. I've paid my price. Where's the reward for this thing to get better, or for something else like that? What helped you? What helped you understand that the suffering wasn't going to, and be okay with it not being easier?
Yeah, it's about perspective. I'm big on personal growth and personal development. I live it. I teach it. And one of the things is perspective. I mean, the difference between a good leader and a great leader is the amount of perspective they have. If I'm going to lead my family well, then I need a bigger perspective. The deal is that when you deal with mental illness, or just when you deal in life, people are entitled, man. Most people think that the world owes them something, that, life, they deserve this or they deserve that, man. I've been a lot of places in my life, man. I've lived a life. I've been all over the world. I've stepped foot on 5 continents, and I've had a great run of things in my life. I don't deserve anything. I just enjoy the journey, because I realize that all of my time or whatever God is going to do is I get to be in heaven with him. And this light and momentary affliction, man, this is just my way of saying, you know what, my wife needs to be loved, and I'm going to love her the best that I can. It doesn't get easier. You just grow stronger through it. And I understand that every year we're together, I'm just going to grow, and we're going to grow together. She's going to get more of what she needs, and I'm going to be more of what she needs. And we're just going to let God grow that relationship. And I think the perspective is when I, lay myself down and understand that I'm not entitled to something. I have a woman who loves me in the best way she can, and I'm going to love her in the best way I know how. And I think that alone, that perspective, you can look past what she's going through and understand there's a beautiful woman under there that needs somebody, and she needs the person that God put her with, and that's me, just like I need her. One of the things I guess I would say is, as you grow stronger, you need better tools. You need better coping mechanisms. You need more investing in yourself. You need, there's so much that goes into this. And I'll be honest with you, even now, we're 18 years into this, I get tired. I am so exhausted sometimes with the amount of energy that this takes. And I'll tell you, I can't blame her for it, because she is a victim of her condition, even though she's not a victim, but the condition is raging inside of her. So her decisions are not really her own. They're just the product of what's going on.
So around those coping mechanisms, do you, are you an avid reader? Do you like to do research? Do you have a small group? Do you have a support system? Is there other men, other women who are spouses of people like this that you talk to, or any of those things?
Yes, all the above. And you need all the above, man. I'll tell you, I only recently found, and this was after she's been diagnosed 10, 11 years now, only after the last 10 years of looking, that I finally found somebody who has been married 35 years and is going through something similar. And my gosh, it's been a life-giving thing to have somebody else where I didn't have to mentor them, and they've been doing this twice as long as I have. That has been a life-giving thing. I'll be honest with you too. The local college of where I live, the doctoral program of the psychology department does free counseling. I was like, praise God. So I see a counselor every week so I can talk through these issues. I believe in counseling. And for all the Christians out there who are like, you don't need to go to that. Well, Luke in the Bible was a doctor, and yet he was writing and traveling and doing missionary work. God does use doctors. And so this last sessions that I had, man, that guy was amazing. He wasn't a Christian, but God was speaking through that session, and I found out what I'm really, afraid of and dealing with, and just really trying to find healing in myself. I do have my prayer groups. I have people that I have on call that says, hey, I need prayer, and they don't ask questions. They pray for me. I've got, I read. I'm an avid reader. I try to read like anywhere from 40 to 60 books a year. I listen to podcasts all the time. I'm constantly doing things. I even play video games because that makes me feel good. And I fish,
Nice.
and you need those things.
Are you a fly fisher by chance, or just spin cast or fly or both?
I have done fly. I have a bunch of flies, but I haven't been in a place in Florida where I could do it. But when I was living in Georgia, I did it for trout fishing, and I loved it.
Yeah. So yeah, sorry. Now we're a little bit of a tangent. I love fly fishing. I've been very fortunate, very blessed to have fly fished on the Snake River in Wyoming, up in Jackson Hole, and I've done it in Colorado and some other places. And so I love it. Well,
yeah.
So you said you found a counselor. You said counseling, because counseling can sometimes become one of those things that we look at, especially from your perspective in the situation. Like, well, you're not the one with the problem. She is. As you eloquently put it earlier, it is a collective problem. But you still have to work. You still have to take care of you, right? I think sometimes there's a tendency in these situations where she's the sick one, so let's make sure she's okay. When the opportunity for suffering is right there with you, and so
absolutely.
So from a counseling standpoint, would you, if somebody were to say, or would you say counseling is more preventative, more reactionary, a little bit of both, or why should I? A
little bit
Jim,
of both.
Why should I go to counseling if I wanted to go if I didn't believe in it? Why should I go?
It's a little bit of both, reactionary and preventative. If you didn't believe in it, why should you go? Let me say this: show me a person, and I'll tell you, and we'll show you how broken they really are. Because every one of us are broken. We don't get out of the Leave It to Beaver families anymore. We have all of our own baggage, the things we grew up, the rejections we faced. Okay, so, and when you come to a normal relationship, and I use the word normal very loosely, because if you can really define what normal is anymore, I'd appreciate it. But the deal is that, so two people come together for a relationship. Each of them have their baggages. That's where conflict comes from, right? Now you get into a relationship. I have my baggage. She has her baggage. And now not only does she have her baggage, she has mental illness. But I still have my baggage. And if I don't deal with my baggage, the mental illness will continually jab at the baggage to where the baggage becomes too much. If you understand, where I'm going with that.
I do. I mean, in the context of it overwhelms, the weight of it overwhelms you because you're not dealing with your own issues.
Right. Yeah. Like I mentioned earlier, my dad walked out on me, man. That's a daddy issue and a half. That's an abandonment issue. Sure. So you deal with the abandonment issues, and now you're dealing, you're constantly in the trenches with your wife or your husband or whoever you have for your listeners, and they've got a mental illness. What happens is it takes your damage, and it adds more damage if you're not dealing with it, and eventually you pop. And it's just, the deal is that I don't want to pop. I don't want my childhood frustrations to be combined with the frustrations that I have with this condition and with this marriage to create like a powder keg, and I go off, and it's not even her fault totally, but we do, there is some personal responsibility we take, the years of angry, almost abusive words that's been said to me. If I'm not constantly trying to get healthy, I would be cracked under the weight of that. And that's the key. Go ahead.
And it seems as well that to that you are working as well as can be expected, given the condition with your wife, that there is a collaboration there, that you both are working.
Oh yeah.
Obviously there's very few, very, very transparent, very open with the whole idea between the two of you, which helps you effectively manage that on either side. Can you speak to that a little bit? How that transition maybe, did she have difficulty kind of sharing that burden, or did she have any resistance to the idea that you were suffering too? If not, or if so, kind of how did you deal with all that to get you guys kind of on that same page, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. It's only recently, actually this week, I think, where she apologized for what she's put me through. And that's her terminology, because it's taken her this long to really come to grips that, yes, she has this illness, and yes, this illness hurts people. And I think that's the first time in the last 18 years I've heard her really apologize for it. Is it something that she, that's truly her fault? That can be debated. But she is, the illness she was born with. But the deal is I believe in taking ownership of things and taking ownership of what you can take ownership for. I mean, that's the only way you're going to get healthy, is taking ownership. And this week, after umpteenth years, is the first time I've ever heard her take ownership of, yes, I have this mental illness. Yes, I've caused great pain in your life, and I'm sorry. And I'll tell you, that moment when she said that, I didn't say much to her. I'm saying, you know what, it's forgiven. I love you. I've always loved you. But something inside of me was just like, wow. And it was just like, it was so peaceful and so calm. And, you could see the reconciliation and the grace of God in that moment. And it was like, okay, there's that hope. She took personal responsibility. I have hope again. This is great, and it was something beautiful. And it's learning to take those moments and to, write them on stones, proverbially, and remember these times for when it's rough. Because I'm going to tell you, when it does get rough, and it will get rough again, she's not out of the woods, not by a long shot, that you remember the times where, like, man, there was this moment that God showed up and things were like, wow, because that's going to drive you through the next moment of when it's like, oh gosh, what am I doing?
So along those lines, when she goes in for a treatment like this, are you really going? Is there an objective involved? Are you trying to calm the storm, or is there? I mean, do you find yourself getting a little bit frustrated that the quote unquote therapy isn't working, or now we're having to retread something? Didn't we already go over this? So in terms of the objective,
oh gosh,
you know what I mean? Because
yes.
Again, we tend to find our way to say, oh, well, she's getting help, and then okay, well, somebody suffering from some sort of XYZ, and you said it earlier about, like, look, I agree that it can be very frustrating. You kind of want, like, hey, why isn't there a result, or why isn't there? Shouldn't this be okay now, or shouldn't this be fixed? So how do you? What is your? And you're doing it right now. I mean, literally right now as we're talking.
Yes.
Your wife's, and this is right around Christmas time, that we're actually recording this, and you had to deal with the situation right, during an opportune time for family and for closeness. This was, it came at the quote unquote worst time. Not that there's a good time, right? And so,
right.
And so when you do that, how do you put a perspective on your expectation for this? Is this kind of that temporary till the next one, or how do you rationalize that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a whole podcast in itself, I'm sure. But
sure.
If I can just roll it down into a couple statements, maybe. I struggle with that. Matter of fact, I had that conversation with her last week. We were on the phone. She's been in the hospital for 3 weeks now. She missed Christmas with us. We came home to be with my family. She's still in the hospital. Matter of fact, they called me today and they said they're not letting her out until they know there's a safe person at home to make sure she doesn't, do something, because she's not stable. And last week, and I'll get real honest with you guys, but last week, I had that conversation. I said, man, I'm just so frustrated that everything we've tried over the last umpteenth years just doesn't feel like it's working. They've changed her meds a dozen times. Matter of fact, she's on 4 different meds, and 2 of them are maxed out for the amount of dosage you can have for human consumption, and they're trying to take the 3rd one up to the max too, and it doesn't seem like it's working. And there's such great frustration. Oh my gosh. I can't even accurately convey the frustration, because it feels like it's not working. And then even now, and here's the brutally honest part, to deal with my wife's depression, they decided to start doing what's called ECTs, which is electroshock therapy. So 3 times a week while she's in the hospital, they're putting a diode on her head, and they're giving her a seizure for like 30 or 40 seconds until to try to recalibrate her brain to beat the depression. And it hasn't been working. It's only made her slightly more aggressive at times. I talked to the doc. Go ahead.
So I was asking, so around that, as a perspective question, now, is that something that you guys decided upon? Is that a protocol? Is that the doctor did they have carte blanche, or how does that work in terms of those treatment methods?
Yeah, the doctors can't do anything without our consent. So they don't have carte blanche. But the deal was, he was talking to my wife, and he said, none of the medicines are working. Here's what we can try. And then my wife was like, who sometimes makes decisions out of desperation, says, all right, let's do whatever so that she can feel better. You know, when you're trapped in something for so long, you just want to do anything you can to feel better. That's why suicide is high in mental illness. You're just trying to feel better. And any way you can escape to feel better is what you do.
So and she's aware. She's aware that this is so you just alluded to it. So it's not like she's just sitting there, waiting to see what happens. She's part of the process to some extent.
Oh, absolutely, 100% part of the process. Matter of fact, we just they do what's called the difference, but the electric shock therapies, they do unilateral versus bilateral, which basically means one diode on one temple or two diodes, one on each temple. Now, I've talked to some people who've done bilateral, and every one of them said, do not do that, because that's where you start getting memory loss and all this other stuff. So we had this conversation, and I was like, because unilateral hasn't been working. She's still depressed. She's missing things. Although she did sound great today. Like she seems okay today. But for the last 3 weeks, it's been frustrating. And I told her, I said, I do not want you to do bilateral, but this is your body. And I gave her all the people I've been talking to, what they've been saying. And she got mad at me. Again, this is the borderline personality disorder coming out. I mean, it's not like she can shut this stuff off. And she got mad at me. She's like, you just don't want me to feel better, blah, blah, blah. I was like, no, it's not it. I just don't want to lose my life and change one set of problems for another. And so she got off the phone. She's in the hospital. She's in a safe place. A few hours later, probably 6 hours later, she calls me and she says, you're right. I don't want to do bilateral. So she's 100% in the process. And if she wanted to do it, again, even if it's against what I think she should do, it's her body. And I've got to respect what she feels like she's hearing from God to do. So she doesn't want to do bilateral either. So it's a great frustration for all of that. You asked the question about basically stabilization. What about this hospitalization? The hospital's job is to stabilize her. I mean, they're not going to fix her. It's not going to come out. And this is probably just a waylay point till the next hospitalization, because she's going to be hospitalized again at some point, because she's been incredibly symptomatic for years. They have not been able to drop the symptomatic expressions. So, but one of the things I had asked the doctor, or the care treatment lady, or the nurse, whatever her job title was, I said, look, you're doing ECTs. That takes care of bipolar depression. I said, my wife has borderline personality disorder as well. What are you doing for that? Oh, we're just trying to stabilize her. Because the only thing that works on borderline personality disorder that's shown any results is what's called dialectic behavioral therapy, which means basically talking it out helps. And then also trauma therapy she needs, because she's been through a lot of trauma, and she's not getting any of that. So when she gets out, the next step is to go 3-4 times a week for groups and therapy. And then she's also going to have a dialectic behavioral therapist and a trauma therapist. And this is going to be, honestly, Sean, this is the first time in our entire lives together where she has all the pieces she needs right now to start the journey towards getting stable.
And you said that earlier about that it took her 18 years to apologize, and I hope there's a little bit of a perspective being drawn out there for those that have their own journey, that have gone through this, or maybe have no idea, to help draw some sort of element that this is almost 2 decades in, and it's still again, like you said, it's not any easier. It hasn't gotten easier to manage. The questions are still just as big, and you continue to fight because you make that choice. And you said that word earlier, and I think that's really important for us to look at in terms of that perspective, you choose to have that. You said it before when you were 10 and your grandfather died, that you made a choice to then give up on God. You have these and you have other opportunities to choose that. We all have those opportunities to choose. We can go whichever way we want. Right.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And this is happening. I mean, this is real. This is right now. And I have no doubt that even when somebody hears this podcast, it could be whenever. It could be 2 years from now. It could be 2 months from when it's released. But there's chances are you're still going to be going through this on some level in your world.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So does that? So in context, because I'm looking at one of the things we talked about was the times. And here's what I want to do. So I want to give that as for this episode. I want to take a chance to sit here and say, take what you've listened to what Jim said. Jim and I are going to hit the pause button. We're going to close out this episode, and then we're going to talk some more and come up with a part 2, because there's a couple other things I think that are really, if you're good with it, buddy, if you're good with this,
I'm fine.
To kind of put out there that I think we need to talk about, and I think is really worth having this discussion about. And so in that realm, if you're listening to this, and we're going to get to this in the next half, but what I don't think Jim wants and what he doesn't need is sympathy, and that's not why he's doing this. He's not doing this to make people feel bad for him or to feel sorry for him or his wife, because we all suffer, and we're all suffering all the time in some way, right? There's no contest behind this. But the idea behind this podcast is coming to the table and having a discussion around what he's been dealing with the hope and the desire that you have either the opportunity to look within and see where you're dealing with this and how you are, and can you take something from this discussion as an opportunity to help in your lives, or to reach out to somebody or something along those lines, and to have this do something for you, and if this speaks for you. So so Jim, what I do at the end of the episodes is as I pray, I'm gonna go ahead and pray us out on this. I'll stop this episode, and then we'll come back and keep talking if that works for you, buddy.
It works out perfect, man.
All right, bud. Let's please join me as I pray. Heavenly Father, we're just again humbled and amazed at watching your hand in all of this, and seeing how what you're doing with these conversations, and how you're allowing them to come out and be a part of the lexicon and out there into the world. That the opportunity to glorify you, and that what Jim's been doing and how Jim's been handling this is that he serves you first and foremost, and he takes the covenant, as he mentioned, and his promise to you and his commitment to you seriously. And I just ask you continue to give him strength in that. I ask that you continue to I want to pray for him and for his wife in this moment, and just so grateful for his honesty, for his grace, and for all the things that brought him here. And then I ask that you protect those that are out there, and that you do what you can, and as only you can, to help define those perspectives and to give them that. We just love you, Lord. We're so grateful for this opportunity, for this podcast. We're grateful for this episode, and grateful for what it could or could not do, and we ask for it to be a tool not to glorify me or to glorify Jim, but to glorify you. It's your son's name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to close out this episode. The Come to the Table podcast at gmail.com is how you can reach out to us. We're on Facebook and Twitter. We hope that this caused a little discomfort, maybe, or caused a little affirmation for what you're doing. We hope it caused something in you to just stirring, something along those lines. And we're gonna go to another part. So this is part 1. We're gonna do part 2. We're gonna hit the pause button, and then we'll be right back. So Jim, thanks for part 1. We're gonna hit the pause button and get you ready for part 2. All right.
My pleasure.
All right, buddy.
All right.
Thank you so much for listening to the Come to the Table podcast. As always, we hope our conversations inspire you to invite someone you know and love to the table to have an open, loving, and respectful discussion, maybe even a difficult one. If that happens, we'd be honored if you would contact us about it so we could share it. Thanks again.
And God bless everyone.